How many times do people tell you what the why is, but then actually put it in writing so you can go back and read it on your own time? We started doing that because of AI. We started documenting, here's our plan. This is what we're talking about. No one can say there's no plan. They can say they don't agree with the plan or they're not on board with the plan, but they can't say there isn't a plan.
Welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Johnston, and this is a podcast where we explore the seismic shifts that are shaking up the way that you work and the way that you live. And today I am super excited to introduce you, if you don't already know, the amazing Ted Elliott is here with us, and he's the CEO of Copado. I have the very good fortune of working with Copado and helping them create a culture of connection to drive results, helping them with their messaging to get their story out, because they're really doing innovative things in the DevOps space. So they're a DevOps company that primarily supports Salesforce. And so Ted Elliott, welcome to the Seismic Shift podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, we're so happy to have you here. So as you know very well how I feel that connection drives results. And I believe that I want the listeners to get to know you, and that's connection with self. So will you share with everybody, what is your story?
My story. Where to start? I've been helping build software for about the last 15, 20 years. Moved to New Orleans about 3-4 years ago. And I've been really focused on what is it going to take it so that people can go home for dinner? How do we make it so that people can work on software and everyone's not at the office until 4 a.m. and then coming back at 6 a.m. and being yelled at because it's breaking. And to me, making sure it works and that people have a clear idea of they're being appreciated for what they do is really important in DevOps, because DevOps is really a methodology for how to do work. And that's really what Copado has been focused on. I've been with the company now going on 6 years. When I first joined, the two founders from Madrid had been doing large Salesforce deployments, and they were very frustrated. And they wanted to figure out a way that they could go home for dinner. And since then, we've raised a little money. We've sold a little product. We've bought a couple companies. But it's all focused on the ideas of how do you plan better, build better, test better, release better, operate better. And I think we're at this sort of technology shift of AI that's going to really change everything we knew for the last 5 or 6 years and accelerate it for the next 5 years. So it's a really exciting time to be in technology. Does that give you a high-level overview?
Thank you, Ted. And actually, that was a beautiful transition segue to my next question, which is, as the CEO of a DevOps company, what are the seismic shifts that you're seeing in the landscape?
I think what we're seeing is usage of process is going up, but the number of people who have jobs in the space is going down or contracting or flat. And in a lot of ways, it actually makes sense. So you probably overstaff your processes when you don't know what you're doing. They're always the easiest answer. Everyone I talk to, whenever they have trouble, it's, well, if I could just hire another person, if I could just get another person, that would solve all my problems. But when we look at problems and we look at them in the context of what's the product I'm trying to deliver, what's the process I'm trying to execute, and do I have the right people to execute that process to deliver that product? Oftentimes, the last place you want to go is adding more people. Now, once you get a DevOps process in place, what's going to happen is all of a sudden the process is going to start working. And you're going to probably use that process even more than you thought you would use it before, but you don't need so many people to run it because it's actually working. It's no longer putting on a fire all the time. So then that really opens up the question, what do you do with all these high-skilled people that put this process in place? How can they add value? And I think what we're seeing is that they're going to be doing a lot more variety, right? They're going to be involved in testing. They're going to be involved in planning. They're going to be involved in making sure that the operation stays up and running. And before, 5 years ago, these were all broken up silos where there were different teams that just own one thing. But with AI, we're really changing who can do what, how they can do it, when they can do it. And so if you're willing to put your hand in the Cuisinart and turn on the spinner and see if you get your fingers back, this is a great time for you because you're going to find that you can do almost anything, right? But you have to have this curiosity to want to figure out what is it that you can do beyond just getting your job done. Because the problem, when you talk to people, Michelle, and they tell you, well, I'm leaving this job because I don't think I'm valued, or I don't think that people understand what I'm doing, or I feel isolated. And that's really easy because a lot of people still work from home. They need renewal, right? And part of the way they get that renewal is new challenges and learning new things. And if you're not interested in learning new things and you just want to punch a clock, AI is not going to be good for you. Okay. But if you're interested in sort of growing yourself and constantly learning new things, it's going to make it so that creators don't necessarily have to be the greatest artists. They don't have to be the greatest mathematicians. They just need to have an idea and want to pursue it. And so I think that's going to really shift the space that Copado's in, but it's also going to shift the larger economy.
I want to learn more about that. I want our listeners to learn more about that. So thank you for being our expert on AI, because this has become a real differentiator for you and your business, and you're excited about it. And your excitement gets other people excited about it. So for the general listener tuning into the Seismic Shift, what is your advice? You say, be curious, right? And how can we as leaders use AI to benefit ourselves?
Well, so I think there was a couple of different gates that we can discuss. Okay, the first gate is, as a leader, you either have to decide, do you want to be obsolete or not? The AI is here. It's not going away. If you dig your head in a hole in the sand and you stick it there, you're just going to be obsolete. And if you're obsolete, you're not going to be successful. Okay, so you got to put that fear of it, or is it really going to help us? You got to throw that out the window. And you've got to just say, this is going to be here. How am I going to get ahead of it? How am I going to be part of it? Right? Not, the Terminator's coming, and because I'm afraid of the Terminator, I better go hide in the basement. Because hiding and shying away from the future has never been a winning corporate strategy. Okay? So you first have to just say, hey, we're all in. Now, once you decide you're all in, you have to decide, well, what is it going to help us with everything? I mean, there's a lot of times my wife has told me that I've figured out a way to create a lot of complexity around the house by trying to build the perfect stereo system or hook up some electronics or whatever it is, right? And so you have to ask yourself, where can this help me? And the only way you can really figure out where it's going to help you is to try it and to be really honest with yourself when it's not helping you and to back out of it, right? And so we started this initiative internally at Copado called AI First. We've been doing it for about 2 years. And the idea was, any job you have in the business, go see if AI will help you. And we found a lot of things that AI would not help us in, right? But we found enough things that AI was really helpful that we've been able to go from burning $5 million a month in negative cash flow to being EBITDA positive, right? And growing the business by another, $50 million of revenue in that time. So the issue really becomes like, are you on board? Are you willing to try? Are you curious? And what I found that's been sort of odd is that you would expect that everyone would see how this would help them. But people who have their daily tasks are really busy with their daily tasks. They don't have time to be. Curiosity is a luxury. Okay. If going to try new things is a luxury, because I got to get my job done today. And what do you mean? Who has time to mess around with this stuff and give it a shot? So what you really have to do is figure out ways to create safe spaces for people to try this and to not punish people when it fails, but reward them when you figure out where it's not going to work so you can figure out where it is going to work.
Boom.
Right?
That is fantastic. And that's a lot of what you and I have talked about the last 2 years is creating psychological safety. If you're going to be innovative, you have to create an environment where you're encouraging your people to try new things like AI. How can it help you in your job in Copado? And then if it doesn't, and if they make mistakes or if they fail, not to shame them, but to say that's okay. That's a part of innovation and create that psychological safety. I love that. And the second thing I want to focus on is what you said you figured out as the CEO of Copado ways that AI can benefit your company. What are some of those ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious one is always support and taking all the documentation you have about how to do things and putting them in these collections. Because the reality is that people do not read content. I'm looking at a stack of books that are behind you, and you may find even someone who claims to read them will forget them. or we'll forget a chapter, or we'll forget something. And so think of AI as the greatest set of cliff notes. All I can think about is when I was in law school, and I used to use these things called case notes, which were the cliff notes of law school. And I was like, wow, if I had AI, I could have asked any question at any time and gotten the answer I needed to have just-in-time information, right? And so taking all the written words and taking your conversations and taking, I think I sent you a document the other day, post-fault, I think I sent to you, of our meeting, and the ability to rapidly go back and read what you actually said and listen. So like the real power of this is the ability to surface information and to listen.
Tell the listeners how you really are using AI to become a better listener. That was one of your goals this year. I try to, when I work with my leaders, give me a goal, give me a word, give me a focus every year. And your initiative this year is you wanted to become a better listener as a leader, and you wanted to utilize AI to help you do that. So share that journey.
Yeah, so I'm a horrible listener. Let's start off there. I'm a horrible listener because I have an answer for everything, and I'm always trying to figure out how to solve the next problem. And I tend to interrupt people mid-thought with, well, here's how we can do it, right? And what I found was that oftentimes on calls, especially with these video calls you do with people, you're just like, yeah, I just want to get through this, that you're missing 90% of what's going on. And you don't have time to sit for an hour and watch the video of what went on and find those aha moments. But by taking the transcript of the conversation, running it through your AI model and saying simple things like, what were the key points that each person who spoke, what were their key points they were actually trying to make? What are the red flags in this conversation? What are the things that we prioritized or should prioritize? And then what are the action items we agreed to follow up on? Summarizing that into a 1-page or 2-page document that you can quickly scan through. And if you want to, you can go dig deeper in areas that either I don't remember it that way, or that's not how I heard it. And then creating documents that you share with your colleagues to say, is this what you said, or is this what you meant? All of a sudden they go from, wow, I just thought I was in a meeting where he was ignoring what I was saying and trying to broadcast to me, to we actually ask questions. And I've even shifted around to, hey, one of the reasons we don't have great meetings is we don't prepare. So imagine you go to a meeting that you're not prepared for. So you're really not mentally invested in the meeting. You really, you're doing it because it's on your schedule, but you're not invested in it. What if you could change that by preparing and spending more time saying, hey, why don't you send me your ideas of what you want to talk about in a deck format or whatever works for you, so I can read them, maybe even put them in my model and ask it to summarize it for me so I can prepare better. So I can even send you questions before the meeting saying, hey, based on what you're talking about, these are some things I'm interested in talking about. So when we actually get together, instead of having, a meeting, which is a webinar, I look at lots of meetings or webinars where it's a one-way dialogue. Maybe we could just have a conversation, and we may not talk about as much stuff, but we're going to make sure we cover the priorities and we cover the red flags. And it was hard at the beginning when I first got this stuff. I was creating 40, 50-page documents, sending them to people. And I was like, why are they not getting it? It was because it was too much. You need to use the technology to help you narrow it down to the things that are most critical to your success. And sometimes you actually have to educate the model on what you're trying to achieve so that you're referencing the goals you set at the beginning of the year that you documented against what you said, because, we don't document a lot. In fact, the problem most people think is all the answers are on the internet. They're actually not, because the internet only contains what we've written, which is about like 1% of all human knowledge. So taking conversations and transcribing them and then reading them, you find it's not that much. In an hour, you don't really cover that much. But there might be like 1 or 2 salient points. And then next time you get together, you start off and say, hey, why don't we go back to what we agreed we said we were going to do and see if we did any of that stuff. And oh my God, I've had some meetings, Michelle, with people who are like, oh, I didn't know this is what you were going to do. I thought we were just going to have a broadcast of what we want to talk about. And I was like, well, no, I sent you these questions. I actually sent you the notes from the meeting the time before because I wanted you to follow up on them. And let's cancel the meeting until you're prepared. Well, what do you mean cancel the meeting? Well, there's no purpose in meeting if there's nothing for us to talk about if we're not prepared. So I've canceled a whole bunch of meetings, and oh my God, that really jostled people. He canceled the meeting with us. But it's because I'm trying to change the culture to not just me being the listener, but everyone listening and trying to think about what is it we're trying to say. And I think that just creates a better environment. Now, has that trickled all the way down to the troops? We're working on it, right? I've done about 15 interviews of employees. And it's amazing to me how once you start thinking about this stuff, you actually have to train people and invest in teaching them how to use it and make them not scared of it, not make them feel stupid. And boy, I've seen some stupid things. So it's really hard for me to not want to make people feel stupid when they do stupid things. But it's right there. And it's like showing people the light. It's almost like a religious conversion for some people. Although, I don't want to make any reference to any religious conversions. I know that didn't work out for the governor of Michigan recently. But you're basically, you gotta share the knowledge with people, and you got to make them want to get on board and see how it's going to help them.
So this all goes back, listeners, to when I asked Ted the question of how are you using AI to become a better listener, and what he's trying to do is to refine and train the employees in this new way of meeting. And Ted and I have spoken a lot about how you're absolutely right. I don't think that meetings are effective when it's just one way and one person talking. And as you use the terminology, broadcasting, that needs to be much more of a conversation, and there need to be two people listening, and you need to make sure that you focus on your top 3 priorities. And you're absolutely right. Lots of people are not prepared for meetings. So I love what you're trying to do. And as long as, and this is a good segue to messaging, so much of effective leadership is about explaining the why and making sure that you're reminding people of the why all the time. And if you end up canceling meetings because they're not prepared, as long as you explain the why, like, I cannot wait to have this.
Oh, yeah, totally. I was like,
right.
This is an important meeting. We're not putting this off weeks.
Right. Can't wait to talk with you, and not so that they don't look at like, oh my gosh, I just got my knuckles slapped by a ruler, as long as they know, I can't wait to have this discussion with you and spend a little bit more time preparing. And then we both can have a conversation. So again, this is the segue into messaging. One of your best practices that I've been super excited about seeing at Copado is your differentiation amongst your competitors and with your messaging, with your marketing messaging. So you all just got back from Salesforce's huge, big annual meeting called Dreamforce in San Francisco, and you made quite a splash with your messaging. And I'll give an overview to the listeners, and then I want you to bring it to life. So 2 things that Ted and the marketing team did at Copado to make a splash is, number 1, and Ted will bring to life the car that he drove into and drove all over San Francisco that had the messaging of Copado on, number 1. And number 2, they created with AI a children's book that truly brought to life what in the world AI does and how it's differentiated and how it benefits you. So could you talk about those 2 things? Because it's quite a splash.
Sure. So I think we decided early on that AI is going to bring efficiency to everybody, but it has to be focused on making people's lives better.
Yes.
Which was really our core mission 5-6 years ago, was how are we going to make release days obsolete so that people aren't stuck at the office every day? So now when we said, okay, AI is going to change the way we work, how do we make it about people and making people their best, right? How do you take people who are doing a B+ job or B- and make them an A player, right? Because it turns out if you're an A player, AI is probably not going to help you as much as it's going to help someone who's sort of struggling just a little to get their game right, right? You can always be a little better. So I'm not discouraging A players to not use this stuff, but who can you really help? And in fact, that's how process helps people. Process takes people who are kind of doing a mediocre or B job, and by giving them process, they're rock stars and they look great because they are doing the same thing over and over, and they're very smart. They just need a little structure, right? It would be sort of like riding a bicycle, but not knowing how to ride a bicycle. And AI sort of helps you get on the training wheels. So the first focus was like people, right? The second focus was how do we make this friendly? Because a lot of people are scared. Lots of people are scared that their jobs are going to get eliminated. They're not going to be relevant. That creativity on Earth is going to be derided, that the Terminator is appearing, that the Matrix is about to go into a reset mode. And it's really scary, right? And they don't know, am I going to be the person who gets wiped out? They think about their friends who are maybe in finance and lost their jobs with technology or whatever fields there are. It's just scary, right? And as you get older, it's even scarier because you're like, am I young enough to reset myself? I got to work for another 10 or 15 years. Is this going to take me out, right? And everyone always assumes the jobs are going to be the jobs that are the lowest jobs that you take out. No, you go as high up on the food chain as possible because those are the most expensive jobs. And if you can replace them, you get real bang for your buck, right? So we're like, how do we do this? So we came up with these soft, furry characters to describe the powers of AI. And each one of them were different agents that had different roles. But each agent's job was to help a human, right? So we want them to have superpowers. And so we went into the AI and I'm like, hey, build me a character that looks like one of the Grateful Dead bears in a Teletubby, because we want something that when you're at a trade show, you would want to take it home to your kids and show it to them. Because that's really good at trade shows, is stuff you bring home to your family members and you're like, hey, check this out. And I was like, so it can't look like it's going to kill you. Because if it looks that way, there's no way. I'm like, you got to be willing to put this in the bed with your 5-year-old or 4-year-old in the crib and feel like they would be comfortable and you would be safe. And so it's like a furry owl or a beaver or, animals that have superpowers that will help you. And so we put that together. And then we went back and we took notes from a meeting we had in Tiburon. It was like a 6-hour meeting. And we loaded them into AI and said, can you turn this into a Dr. Seuss book? There's 12 pages that talks about these characters, and it created the book. And then we created pictures using AI to tell the story. And it was interesting because you and I were meeting and you said, I've never really understood what Copado does, but I finally got it. And it was all about, hey, someone has a pile of work and we're going to bring in these super agents that are going to help you get your work done so you have more time to go do the things that matter to you. Right? And it's a really simple story, but gets really complex because we're dealing with computers and code and all this scary stuff. But it's really simple. It was funny. I was watching TV yesterday, and there was an ad for a company called Atlassian, which is pretty much the market leader in DevOps. And they succinctly told their story as our job is to make it so people work better together, right? And I think that's also going to ultimately be the AI story. Listen, your teams that are multinational, multilingual, different cultures, they always like to act like they understand each other. They don't. But if you can use the tools to create better communication, you said you were just mentioning, Michelle, about the why, how important the why is. How many times do people tell you what the why is, but then actually put it in writing so you can go back and read it on your own time? We started doing that because of AI. We started documenting, here's our plan. This is what we're talking about. No one can say there's no plan. They can say they don't agree with the plan or they're not on board with the plan, but they can't say there isn't a plan. Right?
That's the power. You're absolutely right. So the key is you have to communicate and communicate again. And every time you begin a meeting, you got to state the purpose. Here's why we're doing this. Here's why we're here. Create a little connection. Let's not dive straight into the agenda and results. How's everybody doing? Right? And then go into accomplishing the goals and then wrap it up and remind everybody again what you accomplished, who's in charge of what, and why you're doing what you're doing. And it is a constant reminder. And so much of leadership is effective communication, constantly reminding people of the why. Because as humans, we need purpose. This whole loneliness epidemic that's happening really is not going away for a while. I mean, we are in the thick of it and it's tough. And like you said earlier, Ted, we as humans, we need to figure out ways that continue to stimulate our brains, to connect one another with each other. We need purpose every single day. So I love what you're doing with the messaging. Now tell everybody about how you drove into and around San Francisco to highlight the message of Copado.
Yeah, so I have a Cybertruck, and we wrapped the Cybertruck with the characters, and we had to drive around, and we had a driver who just drove the car in circles around the convention. And as a result, everybody thought we had like a dozen Cybertrucks. And so we were getting text messages, and we did a social media campaign where if you took a picture of the car and you posted to social media, we'd recognize you and you get entered into a contest. But overall, what it was doing is it was selling the message of creativity, right? And that we weren't afraid to be creative. And it was really interesting because last year, the signs we bought billboards last year on Highway 101 leading from the airport into San Francisco, and they said less divorces. And we posted them to social media, and someone called me out and said, what do you mean less divorces? This is total BS. And I got an executive from Cisco to respond to that person saying, no, we track divorces. And since we got Copado, we've had less divorces. And the guy had guaranteed that he would, if we could prove it to him, that he would come do all this stuff and eat his shoe pretty much. And he just disappeared. And that's so much of social media is people who are basically hyenas who just bark. And then once you snap them, they run off in the bushes and hide. But this was a better message. I mean, I always loved the less divorces message. It was how we got Masa from SoftBank to write a check for $50 million, as he liked it too. But what a more powerful message is like, hey, how can we make it so your life rocks, that you're the best you can be? Yeah, you're going to have less divorces then too, because you're going to be a happier person. I think it really comes down to happiness. I mean, we do something every year on Copado Day, and Copado Day is Columbus Day. It's the anniversary of Copado. And it turns out Copado's from Spain, so Columbus Day works out pretty well for us. And we had teams all over the world going out and giving back, right? And so I woke up yesterday morning and I'm like, okay, what is it we're doing here in New Orleans? I was told we're going to Hammond to the African American Museum, where they've gotten a grant from AT&T to train kids on how to use technology. And I was like, okay. So I drove up to Hammond. I got there a little late, and our team had already been sort of doing work, and I felt kind of bad that I was late. But I realized their main problem is they didn't know how to hook up a network. And so I helped them re-network the room in about a half hour. And you could see the look on people's faces about that. And they wanted to know more about what we were doing. And there were kids from Southeastern who were computer science majors. And we started showing them stuff you could do with AI. And that was just one story, right? This morning we had an all-company meeting. We do it once a month. And different people talked about different things they did, whether it was cleaning a beach in Half Moon Bay, or walking around London and picking up the trash, or volunteering to collect food for food banks. And I said to everybody, well, so like, what is it you got out of that? And they're like, oh, I got to be around my colleagues, and we started talking about AI, or we started talking about different things, but it wasn't in a work setting. But we get so little of that because we're all working from home that it felt so good for those people who did. And you could tell the people who had not been able to come to an event or hadn't done something were kind of realizing they had really missed out on something special. And I just said, well, hey, we got a whole year to plan how you can get to one of these events. Let's work on it, you know. But you always find from those things that every minute you give, you get 10 minutes back. And so it was a great day, and it was, and AI worked into it, right? I even drove the Cybertruck up there, and they're like, what's up with the Cybertruck? Now, it was a little dusty because I had been over in Belle Chase the day before driving on a dirt road. And so on my way back, I went to the car wash and I got the Cybertruck animals clean, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, I love the themes that we've touched on, Ted, and they're big themes of happiness, of purpose, of community, connection, giving back, the importance of messaging, the importance of explaining the why, and ultimately AI and how it can benefit us, and we can be better together. And I hope that all the listeners learn something. It's hard not to learn something from Ted Elliott. I always love just hearing his thoughts. He's got such an interesting brain. And I can't thank you enough, Ted, for sharing all of your insights and just your kind of call to action. We do as humans, first of all, we need each other. We need time together, right? We need community. We need connection. And with this AI wave, it's not going away. And we need to be curious and explore how it can best benefit us. So thank you, Ted Elliott, for being on the Seismic Shift podcast.
Thank you.
Take care, y'all. See you next time. Thank you for joining us on the Seismic Shift. And before you go, can I ask one favor of you? Do you mind sharing today's episode with a leader you know? The power of this conversation is found in your using it and sharing it to create real connection in your life. Lastly, I'd like to thank Loyola University New Orleans and the Terra Firma audio team for helping bring this content to life.